Welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting another small lot coffee by Starbucks Reserve. Today we are tasting the Rwanda Hingakawa. This is a really important coffee because it's a symbol of just the world changing around us and how we can create a better environment not just for a single group of people but for everyone, and that includes providing better jobs, equality, and also fair trade and ethical sourcing. And so this coffee is very important in terms of the story where it comes from and the women who run this farm. Super awesome, really amazing, very, very inspiring story. For those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you here joining me for these coffee tastings. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back. It is an honor to have you back, and your passion for coffee truly shows if you've been to more than one of these coffee tastings. So, for those of you who are joining me for the first time, I like to brew my coffee 3 different ways. That way, we get to explore the different flavor notes that a single cup of coffee has to offer. And so, with the 3 different brewing methods that we have here, we have a French press, Chemex, and pour over. It's going to give us different flavor notes depending on the amount of oils, sediments that we get in the coffee. And so each different brew method is going to impact the flavor differently. And the reason why we do this is so that we can properly explore the different flavor notes and experience and learn what our favorite brew method is with this particular cup. Because your favorite brew method might change between different brews depending on the level of citrus notes and then the different level of bitter chocolate notes. And so with the different brew methods that we choose here, we're choosing to bring out different flavor notes, and then after we taste the coffee, we get to really explore what brew method is our favorite for this particular blend of coffee or particular single origin coffee. So with the pour over coffee, we are going to get a little bit more oils compared to sediments than the other brews. We have a paper filter that's going to absorb a lot of the sediments, but it's going to catch just a little bit of the oils, but a lot of those oils are still going to pass through the paper filter. And because of this, it's going to impact the bright flavor of this particular cup of coffee. And so with the Chemex, we have a paper filter, but it's a triple paper filter. So we're still catching all those sediments that we would normally catch on the regular paper filter, but because we have that extra layer of paper, we're going to catch more oils. Because we're catching more oils, we're going to tone down those bright citrusy notes or those bright roasty notes, depending on what flavor notes that this particular blend has. And we're going to allow some more of those bitters to come forward, giving us a more balanced cup of coffee. Now, when you brew a pour over and a Chemex, you want to let your coffee bloom when you pour the initial bit of water. And what that does is it allows the air that's trapped in between each of the individual grinds to rise to the surface. Because if we pour all our water all at once, we're going to push that air down and we're going to create a barrier, and it's going to slow down our brewing process. We're going to overbrew our coffee, and then we're going to end up with a bitter cup, over extracted. It's not going to taste great. So making sure that we brew our coffee correctly and that we follow the proper practices of a brew method is going to ensure that we get the proper flavor of that particular coffee. And making sure we get the proper flavor out of the coffee is very important because it's us paying tribute to the people who put a lot of work into this coffee and making sure that we get the flavor notes that they want us to taste. So when farmers grow coffee, they go through a very lengthy process of testing, trials to get certain flavors. And so there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that the farmers get the flavors that they want you to taste. Then they hand it over to the roasters, and then the roasters also have their processes that they bring out certain flavors that they want the drinkers to taste as well. So we have 2 steps. that are very lengthy in process, where it's all about making sure we get the right flavors in our beans. And then the coffee ends up at our table. And it's up to us to make sure that we grind our coffee right, use the proper proportions, the right amount of water and freshness of water, so that we can get the flavors that's intended for us to taste. And that's just us paying tribute to the people's hard work of growing this coffee, because it's not easy. There's a lot of work, takes a lot of time, and that's just how we honor the people who grow our coffee, is by properly brewing our coffee so that we can get the flavor notes that they want us to taste. Perfect. So small lot coffees are very important because they have a little bit more impact on the farmers who grow the coffee. With core coffees, where there's like a mixture of all different regions, they end up getting sent to like a third party processor, and then it gets into the roasters. And what that happens is there's another middleman in between us and the growers, and they just don't make as much money as they could. And so with the single origin coffees, a lot of these single origin coffees, and especially these small lot coffees, they have on-site processing plants where they process the beans there, and then they dry them in the beds there. And that's really important because it gets rid of that extra processing from a different person, and allows the farmers to make more money. Yes, they're doing a little bit more work, but then at the same time they're receiving more of the money at the end of the day, which is very important, because that's what ethical sourcing is about, is making sure that the farmers get paid the fair wage that they deserve when it comes to growing whatever they're growing. And in this case, a gourmet cup of coffee. And so small lot coffees have a major impact on the farmers who grow it, because they see a lot more of that money, because they process the coffee on site and then send it to the roasters, rather than having to send it to a central processing plant. And so with this particular cup of coffee, we're getting notes of blood orange, floral aromas, and then we're also going to get melon with a brown sugar sweetness. So it's going to be a very, very bright cup of coffee. We're going to get that intense blood orange flavor, and then we're also going to get some intense floral notes as well. Oh yes. So immediately right off the bat, we're getting those blood orange melon notes. And then as our palate starts to clear, we're really getting those floral notes. And then those floral notes have like a little bit of a sweet flavor to it, and that's where that brown sugar sweetness is coming through. So immediately right off the bat on the pour over, we're getting that strong blood orange melon kick. It's got a super bright citrusy flavor with a subtle melon sweetness. It's really pleasant. A little bit too much of a citrusy kick for me, but it's still at the same time, it is a very pleasant cup of coffee. That is really good. So while we wait for the Chemex to finish up pouring, we are going to try the French press. With the French press, we are getting the full amounts of sediments and the full amounts of oils. And so what that means is we're going to get a much more flavorful cup of coffee. We're going to get a more balanced cup of coffee as well, because on the pour over we have more oils than sediment. So we're going to get a much, much brighter cup of coffee. With this, we're getting a lot more of those sediments. So it's going to give us some more of those bitter notes. So I'm expecting to taste more of that melon flavor. And then because we're getting more bitters, I'm expecting that brown sugar sweetness to be a little bit sweeter, in contrast to the bitter notes that we're going to be getting from the sediments. Oh yeah, so initially right off the bat, we are getting that blood orange flavor, but it's not a super citrusy kick like it was on the pour over. We're getting those subtle blood orange melon flavor notes. And the thing to think about blood orange is a citrus fruit, but it's not as citrusy as like a lemon or a lime. So it has those citrus notes, but it's more tame. And so that's what we're really getting in this is we're getting that much more tame citrus flavor that you would expect from a blood orange. When we do the pour over, it's very, very bright, and then you get that melon sweetness, which kind of kicks up that brightness. And so it's pretty intense. It's smooth, but it's a surprise almost. And so with this, we are getting a more subtle citrusy flavor with that melon sweetness, and then we get a much more smoother floral flavor as well. So with the floral flavors on the pour over, we get a little bit more of a lingering flavor towards the end. With this, we get the floral flavors, but they don't attach itself to its tongue, so we get a clear palate afterwards, with being left over with that brown sugar sweetness. Really good. Super mellow. Super mellow. I really like that a lot. So now we're going to do the Chemex. With the Chemex, it is a triple paper filter, and then the paper filter is also slightly thicker than a regular Melita Benz filter. And so with this, we're going to absorb a lot more of those oils. And so because we're already absorbing those sediments, just catching a little bit more of those oils is going to give us a more balanced cup of coffee. So on the pour over, we had a very citrus heavy coffee. We're really getting those blood orange notes that really give it a strong kick in the very beginning. With this, we're going to have a very similar flavor to the French press, but it's not going to be as intense in flavor notes. Oh yeah, so we're definitely getting a little bit more of those bitter notes right off the bat. We're getting very heavy melon flavor, and so those blood orange notes aren't as predominant in the Chemex like they were in the pour over because we're not getting as much of those oils. And so because that blood orange flavor isn't as predominant, we're actually tasting the melon a lot more in the Chemex than we do in the pour over or the French press. And then as our palate starts to clear, we get a very strong floral flavor with that sweet brown sugar flavor. And so it's a very, very subtle melon flavor, and then we get those floral notes with a bit of a sweetness. And the reason why we get that sweetness is because that melon flavor that we get off at the very bat isn't very sweet. It's got a bitter quality to it. So it's a bitter melon flavor at the very beginning with a slight bright citrusy notes from that blood orange, but it's hardly there because we're mainly tasting those bitter melon notes. And then as those melon notes start to clear away, we get a lot of those floral notes paired with that sweet brown sugar. And the reason why we get that sweet brown sugar flavor so strong on this one is because those bitter melon notes, as those bitter notes start to wash away, that's in contrast to those bitter notes. Those brown sugar notes taste sweet. And so that's what gives it that sweet quality. It's just the contrast from the bitter notes to the clear palate of the floral notes and the brown sugar sweetness. Now, if I had to choose a favorite brew method among these three, I would definitely choose the French press just because we get a little bit more of a balanced cup of coffee. With the Chemex, we do get a slightly bitter cup of a more bitter cup of coffee than the rest. It's very interesting how that those melon flavors really come out to be more bitter than you would expect. But then you get a pretty sweet cup of coffee towards the end because of the contrast between the bitters and then the clear palate. And then with the French press, we're getting a more balanced cup of coffee where we get the melon and the citrus together, and then as that washes away, we get the floral and brown sugar sweetness. So that's what I like is a more balanced cup of coffee, easier to drink. I'm not surprised by an intense citrus flavor that's coming from the pour over. And so this week, my choice for my favorite brew method is going to be the French press, just because it's all around the more balanced cup of coffee for this particular single origin coffee. Perfect. So now we're going to learn a little bit about what makes this coffee so special. So the Rwanda Hingakawa comes from an initiative of all women grow up, and they started growing coffee after they were devastated by horrific events. And so, just to go back a little bit in time, the area in this particular area in Ethiopia and a lot of this region of Ethiopia and also Kenya, w the land was taken from the people by British colonialism and then also German colonialism, and it all had to do with farming and taking farmland to provide food for their armies. And then also at the same time, to continue growing coffee, they started taking over the coffee plantations and growing coffee for themselves so that they can keep it to themselves. And so what happened is a lot of these people ended up getting displaced or forced to work on cheap or free labor. And also there was a lot of rebellion because a lot of the people in this area didn't like that. And with that came a lot of um, genocide. So a lot of people were killed, unfortunately. And so this area of the world has seen major devastations when it comes to colonialism, that are being displaced and their land being taken from them, and then trying to resist and then being killed at the same time. And so this area of the world has a very, very dark history. And then it just continued to get dark as we progress into the future. And so after World War II, Ethiopia and Kenya started to gain their independence, but it was a lot of trials and tribulations in the process. And then at the same time, there was an unfair distribution of land. And so one of the tribes that existed before everything had happened had only a certain amount of land. And then when the land was redistributed to the different tribes of Kenya and Ethiopia, one of the tribes got pretty much a majority of the land when they pretty much only held like 10% of the land before. And so what happened was, in order for this tribe to keep the land that was given back to them, they actually had to go to the different tribes and commit genocide. They would go through the different tribes and they would kill the men and children so that these tribes couldn't revolt back against this bigger tribe. And so that was the way that they secured their land, is by going around and killing the men and children. And so we have a group of people where their land was taken from them, where they were forcibly to work and continue to grow coffee at a free or low labor. And then once they get their land back, it was given back to them unfairly. They didn't actually get their land back. A group of people got all the land, and then they went around and took measures in order to keep that land. And so with this particular cup of coffee, it comes from a group of women who were impacted by the tribe going around and committing genocide and securing this land for themselves, making sure that this particular tribe couldn't revolt back against them. And so these women have taken a brave step in a part of the world where doing so could get you killed or stoned, and they have taken the initiative to become leaders in their area, and taken the role of leadership and growing coffee, and not only just growing coffee, but taking that bold step to sell to a roaster and be that single origin farmer who they're directly sourcing their coffee to an outside country. And so the dangers of this is that that same tribe that's going around and trying to keep them suppressed can see this and retaliate. And so that's what makes these women in this farm so brave, and it's so admirable that they do this because they come from a part of the world where if they were to take up a role of leadership or do anything like this to impact their area, um, they are in danger of being stoned to death or just being um, executed. And so the bravery that it takes for them to be able to take this step and take a role of leadership and just start their own initiative is just amazing. And then the other part about it as well is how it impacts the neighboring area. So you have these neighboring farms, neighboring countries that see these women who have taken up a role of leadership. They've taken charge and they've started growing coffee and they're making their own money, and not only are they making their own money, but they're making good money because it's ethically sourced and it's fair wages so that they're actually able to grow and thrive. And so people around them see this and they see the important, brave steps that they've taken to become leaders in their area. And it inspires other people in that area who aren't allowed to be in a role of leadership, who aren't allowed to have an education, to go out there and seek leadership and seek an education. And you see these people making these brave moves, and it inspires you to make those same brave moves depending on where you live. And so that's what makes this coffee so important, is that these women, not only are they making a brave step for themselves, but they're making a brave step for all other women and all other communities in this area that can't take a step up and can't fight for themselves. And so it's really cool to learn how coffee not just impacts the like us at home, but it really impacts the people around the world and how it helps shape the communities of the people who grow it and how it can really inspire other people around them. And so with the growing of coffee, we have the Hingakawa and the Abakundakawa initiative, which are both very similar initiatives. And with those, and as they grow, they're going to inspire more initiatives where a lot of these tribes are going to start to do things on their own and start to grow, and with the support of other governments and stuff like that, they can be protected and make sure that this particular tribe doesn't come through and erase all the hard work that they've done. Although they are still in danger of things happening, there is that somewhat security that they have where people actually do care. And so, um, by learning these stories and sharing these stories with you, and if you share these stories with someone else, we can help better appreciate the cup that's in our hand. And every cup that we have, no matter where it's from, has a story that impacts the farmers, the community, and the earth. And so, by learning these stories, it's really all about paying tribute to the people who grow our coffee and really having respect for what we're drinking. And so that's what makes this cup of coffee so important, is women empowerment and women taking the role of leadership in an area of the world where women being in a role of leadership and women having an education isn't allowed. And so very, very cool that these women are taking that brave step and inspiring other people around them to also take that brave step. And then it can just show us how much coffee impacts the communities and the environment around the world. So thank you everyone for joining today's coffee tasting. I hope you guys enjoyed. Super awesome. This is one of my favorite coffees to talk about just because of how much of an impact it has on the people that grow this coffee. So very, very cool. It is an honor that you guys stayed this long. Thank you all for joining. If you guys enjoyed today's coffee tasting, hit the link above. That is going to be a list of videos that I have done in the past. And the link down below is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Thanks again, and I hope your coffee was just as delicious as mine was.